Whew, welcome to the Beauty Way. It's beautiful to have you listening and beautiful to have Lynley joining us today. Thank you for joining us, Lynley. This podcast has been sparked by a conversation that the three of us had around concepts that were sparked within us in a recent podcast that has had a lot of discussion publicly. One of Aubrey Marcus's podcasts is with John Demartini. And in conversation, Lynley said that she had been contemplating some of these themes. And both of these women, to me, are such deep thinkers and such expansive thinkers. And I thought, and also we are we're very aware, all three of us are very aware of multidimensionality in conversation in life. And so we decided that we wanted to have a conversation around the themes that and concepts that were brought forth in that podcast. And holding us is this concept of amorality and what this actually is, which in a way is the beauty way. And it is the way of moving through the world and creating the world in a place of doing the things that we know are the best for us, creating, contributing to evolution and contributing to the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. And so I invited both of these ladies to have a conversation about this and just to see where this goes. And as we were thinking about where we might start, the first question that arose was, why are humans so uncomfortable with non-judgment or amorality? Why are we so uncomfortable with that? And I'd love us to start off with that particular question.
Amazing. Thanks for the introduction, Kirsty. I'm so excited to have this conversation. Welcome back, Lynley. For those who are listening, you probably may have already listened to the previous podcast episode that we had with Lynley. And so it's really exciting to have this conversation, all of us together today. And I'm pumped for this conversation because I feel like, as you said, Kirsty, there were so many epic threads and themes that were kind of woven through this, and the doors that it opens and the conversations that it creates, and ultimately the recognition of the different layers and levels of consciousness and how so many different things can be true all at once, and that there is um, you could have a whole group of people agreeing on something to be right and a whole group of people to agree on something to be wrong. And yet there'll still be other people who disagree. And it's like, how do we find that place in between? How do we find that place? And I in relation to that question of why do people find amorality so uncomfortable? And it's interesting because where do we find our own goodness in how other people perceive the world? Where does it validate our goodness or our not goodness, depending on what angle we're coming from? And so I feel like when we want our internal validation to be, I am a good person, we look outside to somebody to say this is right or wrong to validate, oh, yes, I agree, and so therefore I'm good. And I think that there's an undertone of discomfort in all of us to some degree where we recognize that kind of external checkpoints of like, oh, yes, I fit into the mold. And I think that part of the human condition is to be in the belonging and to be part of the tribe. And as much as we want to be individuals and we are unique and individuals, there's a level of like, how do we come together? And so when we hear someone with different perspectives as us, particularly that might lean against the group or the collective, there can be like a great discomfort because I think it pushes into our safety and pushes into our connection and pushes into all the things that make us human.
Definitely. I want to, just before we go any further, just to clarify around that concept of amorality, because we were talking about it before. The amorality is in that space, exactly what you're talking about, Carissa, of not labeling right and wrong. Yeah. It's not looking from a place of judgment. It's not looking through behaviors and conditioning. It's looking from an overarching perspective of seeing seeing everything as it is in a present moment. And
Mm,
this is what we find so as a humanity, as a species, I think that's what we find so difficult. And therefore, we place our own projections and our judgments onto things that don't necessarily feel good or right to us from our own internal perspective.
mm.
Mm. What do you have to say about that, Lily?
Yeah, there's so many different aspects that kind of come through with that for me, and it feels almost like a timepiece comes into like these ponderings for me of present moment humanity and what the human is experiencing and responding to like right now in the moment. Yeah, based on that soul nudge or um lizard brain, like reptilian brain, stepping forth into responding to life, versus being able to see something from outside, like that wider point of view, and perhaps a hindsight point of view. Because, like things that we judge in the moment can look completely different once we reflect upon something. So just having that timepiece in my awareness, just it makes it different for how I would move forward into just contemplating, yeah, something as this question, because it comes straight back to the paradox of you know of what that even is, whether polarities on each side. It's almost like a portal gets made of, like, I always put things on the circle, so it's like, and it kind of collapses and then moves through a portal into the greater kind of awareness of something which does not look like what it did at first.
I love that you mentioned the word paradox because I feel like people find paradox quite uncomfortable as well.
Mm,
Because paradox again is saying, well, this is this, but it's also this. And our brain, when it's so conditioned, can't necessarily understand that. It's like, how can it be two things at once? And when in reality, we are all of it all of the time. And this was a big theme that I felt was talked about in that particular podcast was
mm,
this aspect of when I can see from that perspective, when I can see from this overarching perspective, which none of us is perfect at, but we get to align with it more and more. And as we align with it more and more, we move beyond judgment of right and wrong, and therefore feeling angry or resentful, or creating these emotions within ourselves that create dis-ease in our bodies. And that's, I think, the a big piece for me, when we can see the paradox for what it is, not that it's right or it's wrong or it's bad or it's good, we get to align more with the spiritual truth of who we are. And a lot
mm,
of people find that very challenging as well.
mm. Yeah, I feel like the rehumanization of someone that we classify as bad, or an act that we classify as bad, is such an important piece for humanity's evolution of consciousness. Because the longer that we spend in the you've done this and so therefore you are bad, or that you've done this and so therefore you are good, both ends of the spectrum can be as problematic as one another. But the longer that we stay in that and don't actually recognize the humanity behind each choice and each experience, we will remain locked in the polarity. And one of the things that I found so interesting is that in order for humans or society to evolve to a place of less duality, we have to start to learn to gather these types of information about why people do things that they do, because what we know for sure in humans is that hurt people hurt people. And so if that is true, why are we punishing the person for the problem rather than supporting the hurt person to not hurt anymore, and so therefore they don't need to hurt another? And I think that the more that we can recognize where we live in others and where others live in us, the more compassion that can come through. And so therefore there's this like more balance in our perspective rather than all the way this way or all the way that way. And the more individuals that come into a more capacity to recognize those pieces, there's more humanity in all of us. And I think that one thing that was really misinterpreted was that idea of, in order to have that perspective means that you don't think this is wrong, and so therefore you think it's okay. And that's what I feel like this is like the evolution of a human being, right? Like, because as we come into these types of relationships with all these different aspects of us, the parts of us that we consider to be good, the parts of us that we consider to be bad, the parts of us that we have shame around, the parts of us that we feel like great in our ego about. The more that we build relationship with that, the more capacity we have to recognize others in that way. And if we and when we start to build that, then those heinous acts don't happen, because those heinous acts referring to causing harm in others comes from shame. And if we are suppressing our shame, then we have these ways of it manifesting, which typically look like harming another, because that is what has us, in some very psychological, messed up way, make us feel better about ourselves for that very short moment. And that could look like power over someone who, because when we feel powerless, then we're more likely to try and overpower someone, because it starts to create that balance rather than presencing that part of us that feels powerless. And so this is the part that I think was missed in the whole idea of this concept, is one doesn't negate the other. And that as we become more and more able to see people in their humanity and be able to hold that amoral perspective, naturally we've kind of been through these stages that have us typically at least attempt to act in a way that has no harm done on others. Or if we do, we have a reflection and we try and resolve or like create some type of resolution or healing or something like that. And I feel like the problem is when we're having two separate conversations at two separate layers of consciousness, because unless there's a bridge in the middle, it feels polarizing just in the conversation, even though like they're just talking about two kind of separate things.
And that's what we're doing here. We're bridging that conversation, because the three of us have all agreed that Aubrey was right and John was right. And so if they're both right and they're both wrong, and neither of them are right and neither of them are wrong, if we come from that amoral perspective. And when you were just saying that, Carissa, what came was this and also when Lynley, you were talking about that essence of timelessness, essentially, and responsibility and I think that is a piece that comes through around why people are so afraid of amorality. Because if we think about amorality, it's calling us to hold a really firm knowing of who we actually are and what's okay for me and what's not okay for me in any given moment. And when I can sit with this and I can reflect in and I can contemplate different aspects, I'm less likely to project onto another that I believe that they're wrong for their own perspective, because I can see that they can actually envisage life in this moment exactly as it is, because I know that I can. And that piece was missed in the whole conversation as well, because of the emotion that was sparked through this, and the need to prove another, um should I say that? I'm just saying it. So the need to prove another wrong in their amorality.
Mhm. I think that, go, Lynley, go. I want to hear from you.
Yeah, me too. I so want to hear
I
from
just
you.
don't know whether to jump in or not. Yeah, I think, like in regards to that conversation, I felt like it was almost like an understanding bridge between the two of like trying to get that understanding of the level that was on there, because Aubrey's humanity, like I would like to think that um like any man that sees his wife being attacked is going to to bring their actual conversation into it, that of course they're going to go and step in and stop that, and not just say, well, what will become, I wonder what this outcome will be. So, for that humanity piece is like, yeah, I'm glad that was there. And there's that such a deeper story of what had happened, what you've both been speaking to is, how did that person come to be to where they are, and what events have all taken place, and how does that need to express in the world now so we can actually see that it's there? Because everything's expressing in some way to show what is here. And yeah, obviously we don't want to see these things in our world, but if they're happening, then something is here to look at, in this very human piece. And as humans, we're going to feel all these human things, obviously, that it come through, and it's not just going to be that larger picture, but having the larger picture of yeah, the amorality, being able to hold that in our beings as we move forward in the every kind of day life. I think it just offers um an awareness and a curiosity of what is there, if we're not just completely polarizing two things um into sections.
Because
Yeah.
what's really being demonstrated by Aubrey in that moment is that his values. He says, if my wife was being attacked, I would stand up for her. And so he's clearly saying, well, this is what's important to me, and I will defend it. And that's such an important masculine trait. Like, I'm going to protect what I love. And and then to see, well, that's actually not happening in this moment, and you can say this is what's important to you, and therefore no. Okay, so as I'm saying, that the shame piece that you brought in, Carissa, is like, if I believe that someone's going to make me wrong for defending and protecting what I love, then I'm going, what am I actually saying here? He's getting upset because he wants John to agree with him that this is a good thing. So there's part of us that if I don't truly believe that what I believe is right, like what I believe is a strong value for me, is okay in societal values, then I will attempt to get others' approval. I will attempt to have that tacit approval from others, and get them to agree with me. But the true aspect of sovereignty is that I know this is what's true for me, and I know this is what's right for me, and I don't need anybody else to approve or agree, because I know my standing in the world, and I know that I have no intention. I walk through life with no intention to harm. And paradox, if something harms something I love, I will stand and protect or defend. So
Mm.
there's the paradox again. And the emotion comes if there's still part of me that um, doesn't fully own the truth of what I believe is right for me.
Mm.
Do you think?
Yeah, I also think that there's like, if we use that example that you just spoke of, which Aubrey used about protecting his wife, there's a very big difference between like the extreme of this person's hurting this thing that I love, and so therefore I will annihilate it, versus I'm going to stop this interaction to stop the harm. But to what degree do we go to the next level? Because
Good point.
there's a very big difference between somebody of his stature who would quite likely be able to forcibly stop somebody to do something, rather than then forcibly stop them and then forcibly harm them in return. Now, that is a really big distinction because,
Yes.
and I don't think that there was necessarily distinction in the conversation. It was just like, and Demartini on his side was willing to say, like, I would probably do the same. It's not about um, the protection piece, I think, is a natural instinctual part of us, but taking it to the next level would come from depending on our own internal reality. And so if we had a lot of inbuilt unprocessed anger, for example, we would be more likely to take that to the next level and push the bounds of what stopping looked like into another, like flipping from one person being harmed into another person being harmed. And we are doing the thing to the other that we just tried to protect someone else from. And so, I don't think that it, like when you come from that amoral perspective, well, it's not even amoral perspective, it's just this higher consciousness recognition of the soul's detachment to something being good or bad is so different to our humans' experience of it. And you mentioned that as well, that the difference between those two things really needs to be bridged, particularly when it's a new concept. Because when it's an embodied concept, we're like, cool, we can see both these things, great, they're both true, whatever, it's not a big deal. But when we are strongly in one and the other is a new one, if there's no bridge that happens between them and there's these finer nuances are not explored, then it's going to create a big level of like dissonance in the body. And that's like what you were saying, Kirsty, about how this can create such a seed of evolution, because when we're triggered, when we're activated, it gives us this potential for like growth or potential for exploration. And one of the things that I was really conscious of during the listening to it was, and we've spoken about this on a podcast with our friend Kerry, who's been on there a couple of times, where she's talked about the shamanic archetypes, the different layers of consciousness. We have the serpent, the jaguar, the hummingbird, and the eagle. And what I was so aware of was that Demartini was talking about it from the hummingbird perspective, and Aubrey was talking about it from the jaguar perspective, and the serpent as well. And so all of those archetypes are required, they're valid, they're important. We need to have our reptilian brain. We need to have the serpent capacity to deal with serpent details and serpent problems. We need to have the jaguar for the capacity, for the emotionality, and for the experience. We need to have the hummingbird to gather and receive the nectar and the wisdom and like the magic out of the experience. And then we need the eagle to look at it all and go, none of it even matters. And it all matters, you know? And when we have two different levels of consciousness trying to have a conversation, it can be really hard. And I'm sure everybody has had this experience at some point in another, where you're dealing with someone who's so locked in their emotional body of their perception on something. There's almost like an inability to come out and see another perspective. And it can be so challenging to sit with somebody in that experience, because like we have to sort of meet them in the similar layer of consciousness, unless they're willing or open to come to a different perspective or layer of consciousness.
Mm.
And I remember, one of the examples that that Kerry's used before when she's talked about the like serpent. She says serpent problem, serpent solution, right? And so this is like speaking to the reptilian brain, because the reptilian brain, each of those four archetypes speak to a different aspect of the brain, which was really interesting what Demartini was talking about. When we don't have neural pathways to our prefrontal cortex and the higher parts of our brain, then we don't have the capacity to be amoral. We don't have the ability. There's literally no access to those parts of the brain that can visualize or see the experience from a higher perspective. And we're only seeing it from the lower parts of the brain, which are the kind of reactionary types of parts of the brain, and the ones that are polarized, which are more in that serpent and jaguar levels. And when she talks about serpent, she says serpent problem, serpent solution. If you get bitten by a snake, you go to the hospital. You don't go to the shaman. Like, you go to the hospital. That's the thing. And if you have a car accident and you break bones, you go to the hospital. You don't go to the naturopath. And when you have the ability to come in and recognize these other perspectives, then you can as well. And I think this is the same is true when we look at a circumstance where we're in protection mode. We're going to have to act from the perspective of the jaguar or the serpent, depending on the situation, potentially a combination of both.
Yeah.
If we come at it from the eagle or the hummingbird, then, like you said, Lynley, we're not just going to stand there and be like, okay, let's just see what happens. Like, that's not practical in the sense of our consciousness. Yes, we can come at it from, like I said, where we can stop the harm, because that would be some kind of blend of all of them, where we're acting in alignment with our integrity and our values, which is, I'm not going to harm you just because you're harming someone else, but I am going to stop you. There is a boundary here, and there is a limit, and this is going to stop. And I think having healthy boundaries and limits doesn't make you more or less of a conscious person. It means that you are standing, like you said, Kirsty, in your values in that moment. And I agree that I feel like Aubrey was very clear on what his boundaries and limits and values are. And the inability to recognize the other perspectives just highlights where in the brain the conversation is being had from.
Yeah. It reminds me of that. I can't remember the whole story, but it's basically a story that's a little mouse going through like this initiation process, basically through the different animals, and he ends up giving, he's going on this whole life's journey, coming across all these different animals, and he ends up giving one of his eyes, I think it's to a jaguar, and then continues on his journey, and then he gives his last eye to the eagle, but even though I can't remember the whole story, I remember the piece in me that brings your life's adventure through this little mouse, through everything that he comes up against and witnesses and sees, and then he gives his eyes to this greater perspective, and then mouse is then flying, and I think that's just really I don't know, just a beautiful concept, because it's like you've got the piece of you interacting with all of your present moments, every single present moment that you come into contact with, and then you are the eagle, and it's so that's quite beautiful. And apparently I'm all full of stories, because the other story that came up for me, and again I can't remember it, so I have to relook at these stories. But it's basically that one about where there's a war, and one of the how does it go? A young boy goes and he breaks his leg in the fields, so he can't go off to the war, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's so good. He gets to stay home." And so, the first instinct is relief, but then the outcome of that is, a young man who's the only young man in the village that can't go to war, and it is devastating for him. And I can't remember the outcome for some reason. I'm thinking he actually ends his own life. So by not going to war, he ends his life, and so we can't see what. Look that story up; you'll be able to find it and be told much better than I have. But it shows us that because there's a wise old man in it that says, "Oh, that's good, that lala," and it's like, "Oh, is it? We'll see. Sounds good, we'll see. Oh, sounds horrible, we'll see." It's kind of yeah, and I like that.
Yeah.
I don't
I
know if
think
that was useful, but yeah.
it kind of
Because
sorry, go.
No, you go.
It kind of confirms that point of, is it the event that's bad, or is it our response and reaction to it
Well, the
that's good or bad?
perspective, because
Exactly.
everyone's going
Well,
to have a
exactly,
different
exactly,
perspective.
exactly.
Yeah.
Which is, yes, because of our responses, right? And
Yeah,
like,
everyone's
because,
going to have a different perspective. And I love that you brought the present moment, Lily, because there was two things that arose when you were speaking, Carissa, was the individual and then the collective. So the individual and the collective. So we have rules in our society, and prevention is so important. But where do we draw the line at prevention? And I think the piece in there with prevention, safer in society with road rules and things like that. And um, uh, where do we allow ourselves to recognize that this is actually a bit over the top and this has gone into the realm of control rather than prevention of something bad happening, and which is in Australia right now, like there's definitely a lot of control as opposed to prevention. And again, you bring in that responsibility piece and people being able to um, want to move into that aspect of hummingbird, because this was something that arose when someone was speaking before as well, want to move into hummingbird rather than just staying stuck in jaguar, because it's so what needs to happen for us to actually allow our wings to grow so that we can move up above and grab that nectar rather than wanting to stay down in the weeds and move there and like get what needs to happen for each of us to choose to build those pathways to the frontal cortex so that we can actually allow ourselves to see from a larger perspective. And there's again in there's an individual question and a collective question, and I don't know like the complex answer for our society, like where we go from here, to actually allow our collective to evolve to this point. And in saying that, it is naturally happening because, as you said earlier, Carissa, I think, the more of us that can see from this perspective, we naturally draw others there anyway.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And I feel like the responsibility came through before when you were saying that before, and it just popped through again of when we can be so completely self-responsible for every single micro action, it forces a perspective shift because no longer are we pointing and blaming another. And for anything, even when, and to a degree, of course, like we have a healthy perspective of like, okay, cool, now this part's your responsibility and this part's my responsibility. And to some degree, that um, the the general societal perspective of victim and persecutor is going to remain there so long as we're in a dualized, polarized state.
Yeah.
And the part of the antidote to coming off of that perpetrator rescuer, because then the rescuer, it's a whole other problem, right? The rescuer, the perpetrator rescuer victim triangle is to come off of it altogether. It's not that the rescuer is better than the persecutor, that is better than the victim, or the victim's better than the persecutor, that's better than the rescuer. Like they're all equally creating their own chaos. And if we can come off of that triangle altogether, then there has to be a level of self-responsibility to even recognize that that's possible, for starters. Because if I don't see you as a perpetrator, and this is, I think, what Demartini was speaking about a lot, which was the empowerment. Because if we keep treating society as victims,
Mm-hmm.
then we keep control and power over as a overarching power structure of government, etc. If we keep allowing everyone to feel the victimization and amplify that narrative, then the powers have more control and more power. And the more capacity that you as an individual have to be in full self-responsibility for everything, And I think that there's a learning curve, like a huge bell curve of like taking almost too much responsibility for everything that can feel almost very painful. But on that learning journey of like, can I take responsibility for this even though I perceive it not to be my fault?
Yeah.
I think that that is such a pathway to humanity's capacity for recognition of others' humanities and to dissolve a lot of the polarity, because so long as we have a perpetrator, we have a victim. And
therefore we need a savior.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we see that in ourselves all the time, right? Like, so all the work that I've been doing over the last few years is like is that Toltec path of we have the judge and we've got the vic, like it's all inside of us. And like when we're listening to this inner voice, we can hear it. We can hear our judge, that's really going, thou shalt, la 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 la. And then the victim is responding, but it's hard. This is how it is right now. And so, we've got these worlds like inside of us. And so it's like, when we actually become conscious of the inner world, we can see what we are judging on the outside of us. It's all happening within us, all of the time. And it's that constant practice of, like, for me, like I constantly am writing my book of lies. So, my judge, which is my little 7-year-old with a big black cloak and giant gavel that she can hardly hold, but she's telling me, do not speak out. You can't do this. You will be la la la. It's so it's all there. And so when you can start to see that like within your own self so deeply, it's like, wow, you can really see it in the next person. And then so I can see how then it comes out with conversations like this. We're just speaking with each other. We're in our families and we recognize it in each other. And then that's the only way that I can see how this happens. And will it happen in my lifetime? I don't know. I can make a wish in this lifetime and maybe my great great granddaughter like has this amazing place to live in. I don't know. But yeah, eventually the systems can catch up to what we do in our personal worlds.
Mm. And that's so beautiful, Lynley. Like when you talked about maybe my great great granddaughter will have that, and that was part of the reason why I created this podcast, because I was like, well, what's something that I can do to every single day contribute to the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible, and that our current existence is flourishing for generations to come. And so that was part of how this podcast was birthed, and that piece of taking responsibility. And you spoke of the Toltec wisdom, and I know that all three of us like think that if we followed the four agreements that the world would just be so much better place. And honestly, if you are listening to the podcast and you don't know the four agreements, start there, because the four agreements teach us to have that standing inside ourselves. They teach us that I am impeccable with my word. I don't take things personally. I don't make assumptions, and I'm always doing my best. And if I know that about myself, and then I like embody that more and more, then I can hold another in that place, rather than looking at another and thinking the opposite to all those things. I'm looking at that person as a mirror of myself and choosing to see them in their highest. And again, like there's a whole nother rabbit hole that we can go through down there, because if that's the case and we've got wounding around that, then we'll receive some more medicine there. But if I'm following and I'm living and I'm doing my best to embody those agreements, then I'm going to be able to change my reality, because I'm holding others in that place as well.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And one of the stories that Demartini told about the political leaders trying to create a resolution and a conversation was such an example of, I feel like it was an example of his own willingness to have seen those parts of himself, because the reality is, if we haven't been present with those different parts of ourselves and different aspects of ourselves, then it is very, very, very hard to see the humanity in another. It is very challenging, because we're in such judgment of those different aspects of us, whether it be consciously or most likely unconsciously. And I felt like that story was so epic, because to me, that is the potential of this type of work, of this type of conversation, of this type of perspective, of recognizing these different values and different places in which our beliefs come from, and can we dissolve our own, it's not dissolving our ego, but dissolving the aspects of us that are trying to protect the other aspects of us from feeling the shame or the pain or the hurt.
Yep.
Mm.
Mm. And it was a powerful leadership story, I felt, because, like I just said before, how do we do this from a community perspective? But that story actually demonstrated that that leader was prepared to admit that she hadn't seen the whole story. Not
Yeah.
that she was wrong. Like
Yeah.
perhaps, in part of her, she would have seen that she was wrong, but then she moved beyond being wrong and saw that she hadn't seen the whole story. And then she was able to shift her perspective. And then she's able to share that with the mob. And because this is where the problem is with the mob, because that mob mentality gets into the frenzy so fast because we've got that underlying emotional residue that hasn't been cleared. And so if we can hold leaders in their highest, and look at her as an example of that and hold her there and say, well, this is what we're aspiring to with leaderships of however our community is organized, we can shift collectively more easily because she can demonstrate to individuals of like how can it be shifted inside myself, and therefore I can help others to create that collective consciousness as well. Yeah, that was an awesome story.
Yeah.
I feel like it's such a interesting one when you talk about her being the like example, because I've seen so many times on so many different people's like social media, for example, where they are being that example and it triggers the absolute crap out of people. And I
Totally.
think I think there were two things from what you said. One of them was about the like to be in any time that we have an activated trigger response to something somebody's saying, it's an opportunity for self-reflection, and we get to look at why is this bothering me so much, because that will give us the key to all these parts that we've been talking about today. And the other piece that you spoke of was the four agreements again, which is like in that circumstance where she was making an assumption about why he was doing what he was doing. And I'm certain that every individual on the planet can be very guilty of that, like constantly. But it highlights the power of one of the four agreements of don't make assumptions, because unless we have a conversation with that person and ask them where their motives and what their motives are and where they come from and get really deep into, okay, cool, and how was your childhood, then we don't actually have any idea. And we are making assumptions constantly that then equal this person is right or wrong, or this act is right or wrong. And so if we can bring back the assumption, and I like to use assumptions in the sense that like, where can I assume that I don't know the answer to this? Or where can I assume that that maybe this person has a perspective that I can't see, rather than using the assumption in a way that's going to create more more chaos or disconnect.
Yeah, it's weaving in that fifth agreement of as well of being the be skeptical, isn't it? Of yeah, because then that is very useful for these places that we are making the assumptions and doing these things, knowing that we're in our very own dreaming what that other person is doing is actually quite funny when we get to that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Be skeptical. The fifth agreement that you just brought in. What just dropped in then when you said that was this concept of mirrors, right? Like seeing everyone else as a mirror of me. And if I'm looking at that person and I'm being triggered by them, instead of projecting onto them, go internally. That's the thing, is like, so many people, we don't want to look at ourselves, do we? So many people don't want to look in the mirror. You know, when I first started doing women's work, the amount of women that was like, oh, I haven't looked in a mirror for ages, because they
Mm.
didn't want to see themselves. And that's, again, there's another little piece there around, be willing to recognize that that person is showing you something that you haven't necessarily accepted within yourself. And
Mm.
even acceptance, acknowledged within yourself. Because when you, it's like that quote from Marianne Williamson that Nelson Mandela used, of like, we're not afraid of our darkness, we're afraid of our power, we're afraid of our light.
Mm.
And if I can actually acknowledge that I am everything. I'm all of it. I'm all of the really, really heinous stuff that happens, and I'm all of the amazing stuff that happens. What does that actually mean for me? Like, I have to move out of this belief that I'm a separate small self. And if I'm not a separate small self, then what does that actually mean for me? And
Mm.
so, but I guess that's the piece that I want to bring into this as we sort of think about closing, I guess, in the next little while, is the point of looking in the mirror, the point of allowing ourselves to see another as an aspect of self, is an empowering perspective, which goes back to what Carissa talked about before about Demartini and what he brought forth, is when I can move more into this amoral perspective, I'm actually allowing myself to feel more empowered. I'm creating a mechanism, a vehicle for me to feel greater empowerment and to feel more of my whole self.
Mm. And true empowerment is very different to feeling powerful,
Yes.
which is the opposite the polarity of powerful versus powerless, and empowered is somewhere in between.
Yes.
Mm.
Um, oh, there was something that I had from what you just said. It's gone. What were you just saying? Just lost it.
What you just said, though, the timelessness piece comes in again, where what Lynley was referring to is, if I can see all of it, then I'm not going to try to feel powerful in a moment, because I know I'm already powerful. And that comes into that timelessness piece. And I get to see it from a larger perspective, and I get to align with that
Yeah.
higher perspective, if you like.
Yeah.
Higher.
And I remembered the piece. It was about how another thing that I think Demartini did quite well was breaking down a large concept. Because what happens when we do this whole mirror thing, where we see this thing in another and we go, there is no effing way that I would do that ever. But what he did really well was he used the example of rape. And he said, let's not look at the overarching act. Let's look at all the components that make up the act.
Mm.
And so that, I thought, was such a great way for us to break down the mirrored aspects. Because when we see someone who murders someone, we go, oh, therefore that's not me, because I would never murder someone. However, when we look at the fact that I annihilated hundreds of ants the other day, and I was there was ants in my kitchen, and we don't normally have ants. It must be because of the weather or something. It's been really dry here, and it's about to rain and all this stuff. And as I'm vacuuming up these, like, they're just everywhere, right? And I'm vacuuming them up, and I'm thinking to myself, this is such the example of where I could look at somebody murdering someone and go, where does that live in me? Because
Yeah.
I absolutely do not think it's okay to be killing ants, and simultaneously I'm doing the thing. And so, and I was also laughing at myself, thinking about how these people, probably more like myself, that catch a spider and release the spider. And I asked the ants multiple times to please leave the kitchen, and they were not interested. And I was like, I've got to take some kind of action. Like, how do I get around this? But, you know, this kind of catch and release mentality and like, no, don't hurt the fly, let the fly outside. And then simultaneously are more than happy to eat a piece of beef. And I was thinking about it and thinking like, I don't think that I'm any better than a murderer if I'm killing an ant. But if we think that we are because the ant is less than the human, or the human's more important than the ant, then therein lies the problem. Where are we coming into this place of hierarchy and making us more important than other things and vice versa and all these different things? But ultimately, coming back to the point of if we can look at a heinous crime or an act and break it down into parts of threads of emotion or different ways that we try and kind of play ourselves, then all of a sudden we have a far better ability to see ourselves in that mirror.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a really great way to explore looking in the mirror of the person that is triggering you, where you don't take it so literally. Like this person killed a human, and so I look in the mirror, I'm nothing like them. I can't see anything. They triggered me. There's no mirror effect in this. But when we can break it down into that, I think it gives us a far greater ability to actually reflect.
Absolutely. It reminds me of last year I was on a jury service in the court, and I think you two may remember me because I really struggled deeply with being on that case because it was a manslaughter case. And they tell you you can only go by the facts of how you make your decision at the end, and yet you're given all of this context, and you say, oh, you can't have emotions about your decision, but here's all these things to feed your emotions. And so, the jury was divided in the space of, he did this and that was the outcome versus all of the other things that we, could take into the picture. And a lot of my stuff was like, yes, the outcome was manslaughter, but all of these pieces, I don't want this man, because who I can see his beautiful heart, humanity, all of the things that led up to it, his intent wasn't there for probably the outcome that happened. Like, I didn't want him to go to jail and have his family ruined. So I could not separate that from the facts. So that was where I actually got to hold that polarizing or amoral view, I guess, within that, but I was not allowed to keep that as a juror. So yeah, it was a very interesting process, and I knew then that I was not built for a system such as courts and things like that. But just listening to you speak, I can see how that plays out in our systems. There's not these extra things taken into account, of an action.
And therein lies the problem with our law system, where if the outcome of that jury's decision was that this person was going to get the support and help that was actually going to support, I mean, the example that you just used might not have been the best example because the intent wasn't there and all these different things. But if it was a murder, for example, and the outcome, instead of 25 years in jail or lifetime in jail, was going to be these different types of kind of
rehabilitation.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what difference would that make to the jury's decision? I think the jury could all agree that this person needs some support and some very big shifts in their own inner turmoil that's happening. And I think the problem is that society has not yet come to an agreement that that is the cause. They think that there's a good and a bad and a right and a wrong. And so therefore we have to treat it in a black and white case. They go to jail, they don't go to jail. They did the bad thing, they didn't do the bad thing.
Yeah.
And that's the danger of having the communities the other way. Like, we've given a power away so much to the mental health system, the judicial system, like all of these systems, and we go, oh, mental health will deal with that person who's, making this neighborhood. It's the community doesn't gather around and try and hold space for, I'm not saying it could happen in every case, but the community has gone from these things, and hence why we just keep outsourcing. Oh, someone else is going to do it. And I think that's where we make the difference now is, yeah, coming back to ourselves and families and own communities, and take out that piece that someone else is going to come in and create a system, because we can just do it ourselves from a smaller point. Yeah.
Mm. Intentionality and responsibility. And even in what you were saying, Lynley, like there was a whole nother thread of fear and love. And there's so many conversations we could have here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, like what did I just want to say then was the this part of us that believes that we have to punish somebody who's done something wrong is still what drives our society. And I know I shared also the other day something that I shared in 2022, which was written by Charles Eisenstein. So, and he's another really great narrator on amorality. And, it was, we will not punish the abusers. And he's also speaking out and now again about all of the things that are happening, and the importance of us again going inward. And it is the only choice. It is the only real option is for every single individual to, when they hear something like this, when they experience it, when they watch something where there's conversations that are being had that trigger them, just stop and sit with the uncomfortable feelings, because we also don't do well that
Yeah.
well as a culture. We don't sit with our uncomfortable feelings and challenge yourself. If you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know how to get there, just set a little challenge for yourself of being able to sit and be with your uncomfortable feelings and see what happens, and just start there. um yeah. Does anyone
Oh,
else like?
well, yeah. And even notice when you're avoiding your uncomfortable feelings, because I think that's a
Yeah.
huge step towards feeling them, is even noticing when you, like, a perfect example of this is a reel on Instagram that triggers the shit out of you, and you instantly write a comment and try and annihilate the person that's created the thing in the first place. That is a very clear example of this person is unable to sit with their own discomfort about this particular topic.
Mm.
And so noticing where we project outwards, where we try and blame another or make another wrong, or deflect our own responsibility, like all these little pieces are nuanced, but the more we can notice them, then it gives us an opportunity to pause. But we can't pause if we don't notice them.
Yeah.
Like, we have to be able to be paying enough attention to how we're acting. It's funny, I was watching a video of a friend of ours the other day, talking about how her ability to presence her tension in her body of when she's in stress is a direct result of her, like, embodiment practices. And I just thought, you know what, that's such an interesting thing, because not many people have the ability to, in the moment, notice constriction and tension in their body. And it highlights the amount of us that are not in our body in the moment, because we're in our head, we're in our thoughts, we're like doing all these other things. And I thought this was it's like a similar type of example, is like, can we bring presence into the moment? Because when we can bring presence into the moment, then we actually start to presence how we're feeling. But if we're running at a million miles an hour and moving through the world, like, without stopping, then, like, good luck. It is so hard when we are, like, quickly moving through things to bring presence.
Mm.
And it's so hard to pause our automated actions when we don't have presence or awareness to the fact that we're automated actions are happening.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Mm.
Whew. Well, that was really good. Thank you both for
Yeah.
thank you both for saying yes to having a conversation with me about this.
So
Thank you.
awesome. Thanks for joining us, Lynley.
Yeah.
Thought-provoking,
Thanks for having
contemplative.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for joining us, Lynley. We
Mm.
really appreciate it. We love you. We love hearing what your wisdom that comes through you. It's awesome.
No,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, likewise.
All right.
And
Thanks,
thank you
everyone.
everyone for joining us. We trust that you have received something from this today, and we'd love to hear any comments that you've had as well. And if any part of this podcast has triggered you today, we'd love to know,
Yeah.
because we're here for it. We're totally here
Yeah.
to have more conversations about it.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.